They told us the night would belong to fear, Anna Keller would later say, her voice steady, almost detached, as if she were recalling the weather instead of a war. Germany, late spring, 1945. The air carried a strange stillness that did not belong to peace, but to something waiting. The kind of silence that settles before a storm you cannot see. The compound sat just beyond a rail line that hadn't been used in weeks, its tracks rusting under a sky that seemed too wide, too calm for a country that had known nothing but collapse. Wooden barracks stood in uneven rows, their paint worn thin, their windows reflecting the last light of day like dull glass. Inside, a small group of German nurse prisoners moved quietly through their routines, folding blankets, rinsing metal cups, speaking only when necessary. They had learned the value of conserving energy, of conserving words. Anna was among them. 27 years old. A nurse by training, precise in her movements, careful in her thoughts. Before the war, she had worked in a hospital in Dresden, where nights meant the soft rhythm of breathing patients and the distant hum of city life. Here, nights meant something else entirely, though she had not yet experienced it. Not like this. Not here. The rumors had arrived before the planes ever could. Whispers carried between guards, half-finished sentences, glances that lingered a second too long. Night operations. Air activity. Words that meant little on their own, but together formed a quiet tension that settled into the bones. Some of the younger women tried to laugh it off, their voices too quick, too high. Others said nothing at all. Anna listened. She always listened. From across the yard, Lieutenant James Carter stood near the perimeter fence, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested discipline rather than ease. 32. From Ohio. He had seen enough of the war to recognize patterns before they fully formed. The sky. The stillness. The way sound carried farther than it should. He checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. Still early, but the light was fading fast, slipping behind the low hills like something retreating. He didn't look toward the prisoners often, but when he did, his gaze lingered on Anna. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. While others shifted, whispered, adjusted their footing, she remained still. Observing. Measuring. As if she were already somewhere ahead of the moment, trying to understand it before it arrived. The first sound came just after 9. Not loud. Not immediate. A distant hum, almost mistaken for wind moving through empty space. Some of the women looked up. Others froze. Anna tilted her head slightly, listening, her breath slowing instead of quickening. She had heard engines before, during transport, during brief relocations, but this was different. This was sustained. Intentional. The hum grew, not into a roar, but into a presence that filled the sky without overwhelming it. Controlled. Measured. Lieutenant Carter exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried both recognition and restraint. He didn't issue orders. Not yet. Instead, he watched. The guards along the fence shifted their weight, eyes scanning the horizon even though there was nothing to see. No lights. No shapes. Just darkness pressing in from all sides. Inside the barracks, one of the women whispered something in German, a question no one answered. Anna stepped outside. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Simply stepping into the open as if she needed to feel the air change for herself. The night wrapped around her, cool and still, carrying that distant sound closer with each passing second. She looked up, though there was nothing visible. Only black sky, uninterrupted, endless. For a brief moment, everything held its breath. Even the insects seemed to fall silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. And in that suspended second, before anything else happened, before the night revealed what it intended to become, Anna understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever she had been told about this moment, was about to be tested. The sound did not arrive all at once. It built itself in layers, like something assembling in the dark. A low vibration first, felt more than heard, traveling through the ground and into the wooden boards beneath their feet. Then a second tone joined it, slightly higher, steady, deliberate. Not chaotic. Not rushed. Anna stood where she was, her eyes still fixed upward, though the sky remained empty. Around her, movement began. One woman stepped back toward the barracks door, her hands tightening around the fabric of her coat. Another whispered a prayer under her breath, the words barely forming before dissolving into the night. But there was no panic. Not yet. It was as if everyone was waiting for permission to be afraid. Across the yard, Lieutenant Carter shifted his stance, his boots pressing into the dry earth as he scanned the horizon again. He had heard this pattern before. Not the uncontrolled noise of scattered aircraft, but something organized. Timed. He glanced briefly toward the prisoners, his expression unchanged, but his attention sharper now, more focused. He noticed Anna again. She had not moved. Not even a step. Her shoulders were relaxed, her breathing even, as if she were listening to a conversation no one else could hear. The sound grew closer. Not louder in a violent way, but fuller, filling the space above them with a presence that could not be ignored. Still no lights. Still no visible shapes. Just that steady hum, now layered with a faint rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat measured from miles away. One of the guards near the fence looked toward Carter, waiting. Carter gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic. Just a signal to remain steady. No shouting. No sudden orders. The kind of control that came from knowing exactly what was happening, even if others did not. Anna lowered her gaze for the first time, not in fear, but in calculation. She listened to the intervals between the sounds. Counted them without realizing she was counting. 1. 2. 3. A pause. Then again. The pattern repeated. Precise. Intentional. She had worked in operating rooms before the war had reached her city. She knew the difference between chaos and control. This was not chaos. A faint glow appeared on the far horizon. Not bright. Not alarming. Just a subtle shift in the darkness, like distant lightning that never quite revealed its source. Some of the women turned toward it instinctively, their bodies reacting before their thoughts could catch up. Anna watched the glow. Her expression unchanged, but something behind her eyes sharpened. She took a single step forward, almost unconsciously, as if drawn closer by the need to understand. The air itself seemed to change. Not colder. Not warmer. Just different. Charged with something that made every sound clearer, every movement more deliberate. The hum above continued, steady, unwavering. Then came the first distant echo. Not sharp. Not overwhelming. A muted sound, carried across miles, softened by distance and space. It did not shake the ground. It did not break the silence completely. It simply existed, like a punctuation mark in a sentence that was still being written. The women froze. Not because they were told to, but because they did not know what came next. Anna did not flinch. Her head tilted slightly again, listening to the echo fade, measuring its direction, its distance. She understood something in that moment that she had not expected. The sound had not come from them. Not from the camp. Not even close. She exhaled slowly, a breath she had been holding without noticing. Across the yard, Carter saw it. The smallest change. Not relief. Not yet. But recognition. He looked back toward the horizon, then up into the empty sky, as if confirming what he already knew. The pattern continued. The hum. The intervals. The distant echoes, each one measured, each one placed with intention. No randomness. No confusion. Just a sequence unfolding exactly as planned. Anna took another breath, deeper this time, and for the first time since the sound had begun, her shoulders shifted. Not in tension, but in understanding. Whatever this night was meant to be, it was not what they had been told. Not even close. The sequence did not break. It continued with the same measured rhythm, as if guided by an unseen hand that refused to rush, refused to lose control. The distant echoes came and went, each one separated by the same careful spacing, each one placed far enough away to remain a sound rather than a shock. Anna stood in the open yard, her senses adjusting, her mind assembling the pattern piece by piece. Around her, the others began to change. Not all at once. Slowly. A woman who had stepped back toward the barracks door now leaned forward again, her grip loosening. Another lowered her hands from her face, her breathing still uneven but no longer breaking. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer had the same shape. It was no longer immediate. It was waiting, uncertain, trying to understand what it was supposed to be. Anna closed her eyes for a brief second, not in surrender, but in focus. She listened without distraction, mapping the direction of each sound, the timing between them, the distance suggested by their fading edges. When she opened her eyes again, she did not look up. She looked across the yard. Toward the fence. Toward the guards. Toward Lieutenant Carter. He was already looking at her. Not openly, not in a way that would draw attention, but with the quiet awareness of someone who had noticed something different. Most people reacted. She observed. That difference mattered. He shifted his weight slightly, his gaze moving from her to the horizon and back again, as if confirming a detail he had not expected her to notice. The hum above remained steady, but now it felt less like a threat and more like a system in motion. Anna took another slow breath, letting the air settle in her lungs before releasing it just as carefully. She had been told that night operations were unpredictable, that darkness made everything more dangerous, more chaotic. But this was not chaos. This was precision. She turned her head slightly toward the faint glow on the horizon. It had not spread. It had not moved closer. It remained distant, contained, as if held in place by invisible boundaries. A line that was not meant to be crossed. One of the younger women stepped closer to Anna, her voice barely above a whisper. She asked something in German, her tone fragile, searching for reassurance that Anna had never been asked to give before. Anna did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched the horizon again, listened to the next distant echo, felt the space between it and the last. Then she spoke, quietly, her voice steady enough to be heard but not strong enough to carry beyond the two of them. "It is not here," she said. The younger woman blinked, as if the words had not fully reached her yet. Anna did not repeat herself. She did not need to. The pattern spoke louder than any explanation. Across the yard, Carter exhaled again, this time slower, the tension in his shoulders easing by a fraction. He had seen fear before. He had seen what it did when it took hold completely. But this was different. This was fear being interrupted by something else. Something quieter. Something more difficult to define. Respect, perhaps. Or understanding. He did not name it. He simply watched as Anna remained where she was, not retreating, not advancing, but holding her place in the middle of the yard as if that position itself meant something. The sequence continued for several more minutes, each sound following the last with the same careful intention. Then, just as gradually as it had begun, it started to fade. The hum softened first, the higher tone dissolving into the night air until only the lowest vibration remained, barely noticeable unless one was listening for it. The distant echoes stopped entirely, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the one before. A silence that had been changed. Anna noticed it immediately. The absence of sound carried its own meaning. She looked up one last time, though the sky offered nothing in return, then lowered her gaze again. This time, she did not need to analyze. She already knew. Whatever had passed over them had done exactly what it intended to do. No more. No less. And for the first time since the night began, Anna allowed herself to step back, not in retreat, but in quiet acknowledgement that something she had believed without question had just been replaced by something far more precise. The silence did not feel empty. It carried weight, as if the air itself remembered what had just passed through it. For several seconds, no one moved. The women stood where they were, their bodies still caught between expectation and realization, unsure which one to follow. Then, slowly, the world began to return. A faint breeze moved across the yard, brushing against the wooden walls of the barracks. Somewhere beyond the fence, a loose piece of metal shifted with a soft, irregular sound. The insects resumed their quiet rhythm, hesitant at first, then steady, as if confirming that whatever had interrupted them was gone. Anna remained still for a moment longer. Not frozen. Not uncertain. Simply allowing the silence to settle into something she could understand. Her eyes moved once more across the horizon, tracing the line where the faint glow had been, now completely gone, leaving no visible mark behind. No smoke. No lingering light. Just darkness restored to its original shape. She lowered her gaze and turned slightly, her attention shifting back to the present, to the people around her. The younger woman beside her was watching closely, searching her face for an answer that had not been spoken. Anna met her eyes briefly. There was no need for reassurance in words. The absence of panic was enough. The absence of harm was enough. Across the yard, Lieutenant Carter took a single step forward, his boots pressing lightly into the dirt, the sound barely noticeable in the quiet. He did not raise his voice. He did not issue commands. Instead, he walked the perimeter slowly, his presence alone enough to signal that the moment had passed. The guards followed his lead, their movements calm, deliberate, mirroring the same restraint that had defined the night. One of them adjusted his cap. Another checked the fence line out of habit rather than necessity. Routine returning, piece by piece. Carter paused near the center of the yard, just within sight of Anna, though not close enough to suggest intention. For a brief moment, their eyes met again. No words. No acknowledgement beyond the simple fact of seeing. But something had shifted. Not in allegiance. Not in loyalty. Something quieter. Recognition. Anna understood it immediately. He had known. Not in detail, not in every outcome, but in the structure of it. The timing. The distance. The control. And more importantly, he had trusted it. Trusted that the sequence would unfold exactly as intended. That it would not reach them. That it would not need to. She inhaled slowly, the air now carrying only the familiar sense of wood and earth, no longer charged with anticipation. Her shoulders relaxed fully for the first time since the night had begun. Around her, the others began to move again. One woman stepped back into the barracks, her posture less rigid. Another spoke quietly to a companion, her voice steady, no longer breaking at the edges. The fear had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It had been given boundaries. Limits. Something it had not possessed before. Anna took a step toward the barracks, then stopped. She turned back once more, her gaze finding Carter again. He was already looking away, scanning the far edge of the compound, his attention returning to duty, to routine, to the quiet responsibilities that did not require explanation. For a second, she considered speaking. Asking something. Confirming what she had already understood. But she did not. The answer had already been given, not in words, but in restraint. In distance. In the simple fact that the night had passed over them without touching them. She turned and walked inside. The wooden floor creaked softly under her weight, the familiar sound grounding her in the present. She moved to her bunk, sat down slowly, and placed her hands in her lap, her fingers still for once, no longer measuring, no longer calculating. Around her, the room settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the silence of waiting, but the silence of something concluded. Anna looked down at her hands for a moment, then lifted her gaze toward the small window, where only darkness remained. Her expression did not change. But her understanding had. And it would not return to what it had been before. Sleep did not come easily that night. Not because of fear, but because something had shifted too precisely to ignore. The barracks settled into stillness, the quiet breathing of exhausted bodies filling the room in uneven rhythms. Some turned in their bunks, adjusting blankets that had grown too warm, then too cool, as the night stretched on. Others lay still, eyes open, staring into darkness that now felt different from the one before. Anna remained seated for a long time after the others had laid down. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, her fingers no longer counting, no longer tracing invisible patterns in the air. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing to calculate. Nothing to anticipate. And yet her mind remained awake, moving through the events of the night with careful attention. Not reliving. Understanding. She stood eventually, moving quietly across the wooden floor so as not to disturb the others. Each step was measured, not from caution, but from habit. She stopped near the small window at the far end of the room and looked out. The yard was empty now. The fence stood unchanged, a thin line separating one certainty from another. Beyond it, the darkness stretched uninterrupted, holding no trace of what had passed through it just hours before. She pressed her fingertips lightly against the cool wood of the window frame, grounding herself in something solid. In Dresden, nights had been filled with distant sounds, with movement that never quite settled. Even before the war had reached its worst, there had always been a sense that something was building, something approaching. Here, tonight, she had felt the opposite. Something had come and gone, and in doing so, had revealed its limits. That difference mattered more than she expected. Behind her, one of the women shifted in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible before falling quiet again. Anna glanced back briefly, her expression softening for a moment, then returning to its usual calm. She understood now why they had been afraid. Why they had been told to expect the worst. Fear, when left undefined, filled every space available to it. But tonight had given it shape. Boundaries. A beginning and an end. Outside, a faint sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Slow, steady, moving along the perimeter. Anna did not need to look to know who it was. The rhythm was familiar now. Measured. Controlled. Lieutenant Carter. She turned slightly, just enough to see his silhouette pass through the dim light near the fence line. He paused for a moment, his head turning as if listening, as if confirming that everything had returned to its expected order. Then he continued, his presence fading into the darkness without disruption. Anna watched until he was no longer visible. There was something in the way he moved that mirrored the pattern of the night. No excess. No hesitation. Only what was necessary. She lowered her gaze and stepped back from the window. The room felt different now. Not safer. That was not the word she would have chosen. More defined. More understandable. She returned to her bunk and sat down again, this time allowing herself to lie back slowly, her body adjusting to the thin mattress beneath her. The wood creaked softly as she shifted, the familiar sound now carrying a sense of normalcy rather than tension. She stared at the ceiling, her eyes tracing the faint lines where the boards met, her breathing steady, even. The events of the night settled into place, no longer scattered, no longer uncertain. A system. A decision. A choice. She closed her eyes, not because she was tired, but because there was nothing left to observe. Nothing left to measure. And in that quiet, just before sleep finally reached her, one thought remained, clear and simple, untouched by emotion. They had the power to do more. And they had chosen not to. Anna did not assign meaning to that choice. She did not soften it. She did not question it. She simply accepted it for what it was. A fact. And in a world where so much had become unpredictable, that single, precise fact was enough to change everything she thought she understood about the night. Morning arrived without announcement. No trumpet of sound, no sudden shift. Just a slow, quiet light pressing through the thin window, turning darkness into something softer, something that could be seen again. The barracks stirred gradually, bodies adjusting to the new day in small, almost reluctant movements. A blanket shifted. A breath deepened. Someone sat up, then another. The routine returned not because it was expected, but because it was the only thing that remained constant. Anna opened her eyes before most of the others. Not suddenly. Not with urgency. She had been awake already, her mind resting in a place between thought and observation. For a moment, she did not move. She simply watched the ceiling above her, tracing the same lines she had followed the night before, now illuminated by a pale, even light. Everything looked the same. And yet, it was not. She sat up slowly, placing her feet on the wooden floor, feeling the cool surface beneath her. The air carried a faint freshness, untouched by tension, untouched by expectation. Around her, the other women began their morning routines. Folding blankets. Adjusting clothing. Speaking in low voices that no longer carried the edge of uncertainty. The fear from the night before had not disappeared entirely, but it had settled into something quieter, something contained. Anna stood and moved toward the window again. Outside, the yard was already active. Guards walked their usual paths. A truck moved slowly near the far end of the compound, its engine low and steady, nothing like the sound from the night before. The fence remained where it had always been, unchanged, marking a boundary that had not shifted, even as understanding had. She watched as Lieutenant Carter crossed the yard, his pace measured, his posture unchanged. There was no sign that anything unusual had occurred. No acknowledgement in his movements. No indication in the way he carried himself. He stopped briefly near one of the guards, exchanged a few quiet words, then continued on without pause. Routine. Exact. Uninterrupted. Anna studied him for a moment longer, not searching for answers, but confirming what she already knew. Whatever had happened in the sky had not been an accident. It had been a decision carried out with precision, and now it was being followed by something equally deliberate. Normalcy. Structure. Control. She stepped back from the window and joined the others as they prepared to move outside. The door opened, and the morning air met them without resistance. No heaviness. No tension. Just a clear, steady presence that made everything feel grounded. As they stepped into the yard, the difference became clearer. No one rushed. No one hesitated. The space felt the same, but the way it was occupied had changed. The younger woman who had stood beside Anna the night before walked close again, her expression calmer now, her eyes no longer searching for immediate reassurance. She did not speak. She did not need to. Anna walked beside her in silence, her gaze forward, her posture steady. Across the yard, Carter noticed them as they moved into formation. Just for a moment, his eyes shifted toward Anna again. Not long enough to draw attention. Just long enough to register. Then he looked away, his focus returning to the task at hand. That was enough. Anna understood the exchange for what it was. Not communication. Not acknowledgement in the usual sense. Something quieter. A shared awareness that did not require words. The morning continued as expected. Instructions were given. Tasks were assigned. The rhythm of the day took hold, steady and predictable. But beneath that rhythm, something else remained. Not visible. Not spoken. But present. A recognition that the night had introduced a new variable, one that could not be ignored. Anna moved through her tasks with the same precision she always had, her hands steady, her movements efficient. But now, each action carried an added layer of clarity. She was no longer operating within uncertainty. She had seen the boundaries. She had felt the control. And that knowledge changed the way she stood, the way she listened, the way she observed everything around her. The world had not become safer. It had become more defined. And for Anna Keller, that difference mattered more than anything else. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the camp had fully reassembled itself, each movement falling back into place as if guided by an invisible structure that refused to break. Boots crossed the yard in steady intervals. Voices rose and fell in controlled tones. The sound of tools, of doors, of distant engines created a pattern that was familiar enough to fade into the background. But Anna did not let it fade. Not anymore. She moved through her assigned tasks with the same precision as before, sorting medical supplies inside a small storage room near the edge of the compound. Glass bottles. Folded cloth. Simple instruments laid out in careful order. Her hands worked without hesitation, each motion efficient, exact. Yet her attention was no longer limited to what was directly in front of her. She listened. Not just to the immediate sounds, but to the space between them. The gaps. The pauses. The way one action followed another without interruption. It was the same pattern she had heard the night before. Control expressed through timing. Through restraint. The younger woman entered the room quietly, carrying a small bundle of linens. She hesitated near the doorway, as if unsure whether to speak. Anna did not look up immediately. She finished placing a bottle in its proper place, adjusted it by a fraction of an inch, then turned her head slightly. The question came in a low voice, almost careful not to disturb the air itself. Was it always like that? Anna considered the words, not for their meaning, but for their weight. She could have answered quickly. Could have offered reassurance or certainty. But that was not what the moment required. She shook her head once, slowly. Not always, she said. The younger woman stepped closer, her grip on the linens loosening. Then why? Anna turned back to the table, her fingers resting lightly against the wood. She did not answer right away. Instead, she listened again. Outside, footsteps passed at a steady pace. A door closed somewhere across the yard. A voice called out, clear but not urgent. Everything held its place. Because they can choose, Anna said finally. The words settled between them, simple and unadorned. The younger woman did not respond. She did not need to. The answer carried its own weight. Anna resumed her work, but her mind remained fixed on that single idea. Choice. Not the absence of power. Not limitation. But decision. The night had not revealed weakness. It had revealed precision guided by intention. That distinction mattered more than anything she had been told before. Outside, Lieutenant Carter paused near the open doorway, his presence marked only by the slight shift of light as his shadow crossed the frame. He did not enter. He did not interrupt. But he heard enough. Just a few words. Not the entire exchange. Only the part that mattered. Because they can choose. He stood there for a second longer than necessary, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if considering something that did not require immediate action. Then he moved on, his footsteps resuming their steady pattern along the path. Anna sensed the movement without turning. She had become aware of his rhythm now, just as she had become aware of everything else. Measured. Consistent. Intentional. She adjusted the final item on the table and stepped back, her work complete. The room felt balanced. Ordered. Each object exactly where it needed to be. She looked at it for a moment, not with pride, but with quiet acknowledgement. Structure created clarity. Clarity created understanding. Outside, the day continued without interruption. The sun rose higher, casting sharper lines across the yard, defining edges that had been soft in the morning light. Anna stepped out of the room, the brightness meeting her without resistance. She moved across the yard with the others, her pace steady, her posture unchanged. But something within her had shifted into place, just as surely as the objects she had arranged moments before. She no longer saw the world as a series of unpredictable events. She saw it as a series of choices. Some made with noise. Others made in silence. And the ones made in silence were the ones that mattered most. The afternoon stretched across the compound with a quiet persistence that made time feel deliberate rather than passing. Shadows lengthened slowly, drawn across the ground in clean lines that shifted inch by inch as the sun moved west. The air carried a dry warmth, steady and predictable, pressing gently against skin and wood and metal alike. Nothing in the environment suggested urgency. Nothing demanded attention. And yet, Anna noticed everything. She had begun to see patterns not only in sound, but in motion, in posture, in the way people occupied space when they believed no one was measuring them. Near the far end of the yard, a group of guards stood in loose formation, their conversation low, their gestures minimal. They did not laugh loudly. They did not exaggerate movement. Even in rest, there was a restraint that mirrored what she had heard the night before. Not rigid. Not forced. Simply controlled. Anna carried a small crate of supplies across the yard, her steps even, her gaze forward but aware of everything within her periphery. As she passed near the fence line, she slowed slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to listen. A truck engine idled somewhere beyond the compound, its low vibration steady, unchanging. A bird crossed overhead, its wings cutting briefly through the air before disappearing beyond sight. Small details. But each one held its place. Each one followed a structure. Lieutenant Carter stood near a post at the edge of the yard, reviewing a clipboard with quiet focus. He did not rush through the pages. He did not linger unnecessarily. Each movement of his hand was exact, turning one sheet, then the next, as if the order itself mattered. Anna approached without altering her pace, her path naturally bringing her within a few feet of him. For a brief moment, they occupied the same space. No barrier. No separation beyond the invisible line that defined their roles. Carter looked up. Not abruptly. Not in surprise. As if he had already registered her presence before his eyes confirmed it. Their gazes met for a fraction of a second. In that moment, there was no hostility. No attempt to interpret or challenge. Only recognition. Anna did not stop. She continued past him, the crate steady in her hands, her posture unchanged. But the exchange remained, quiet and precise, like a note in a sequence that did not need repetition. Behind her, Carter watched her for a brief second longer than necessary, then returned his attention to the clipboard. He adjusted one line, made a small mark, then closed it without hesitation. Decision made. Action completed. No excess. Anna reached the storage area and set the crate down carefully, aligning it with the others already in place. She adjusted its position by a small margin, ensuring it matched the line exactly. Order. Alignment. The same principles she had seen reflected in the night, now present in the smallest details of the day. She stepped back and looked at the arrangement. For a moment, nothing moved. No sound interrupted. The world held itself in balance. Then, from somewhere beyond the compound, faint and distant, a familiar vibration touched the air. Not strong. Not immediate. Just enough to be noticed by someone who had learned to listen. Anna's head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly. The pattern was not the same as the night before. Not yet. But it carried a similarity that could not be ignored. She did not react. She did not look toward the sky. Instead, she let the sound pass through her awareness, measuring it, placing it within the structure she now understood. Across the yard, Carter paused mid-step. Just for a second. His posture did not change, but his attention sharpened. He heard it too. The same distant signal. The same controlled presence. Their eyes did not meet this time. They did not need to. Both of them understood the same thing at the same moment. The system had not ended. It had only moved beyond their immediate view. Anna exhaled slowly, her breath steady, her shoulders relaxed. She turned away from the crate and continued her work, her movements as precise as before. But now, each action carried a quiet certainty. Whatever came next would follow a pattern. And patterns, once understood, no longer belonged to fear. They belonged to knowledge. Evening returned with the same quiet patience as the morning, the light lowering itself across the compound in long, deliberate strokes that softened every edge it touched. The day had passed without disruption, each hour folding neatly into the next, each task completed without resistance. But beneath that steady rhythm, something remained. Not tension. Not anticipation. Something quieter. Awareness. Anna felt it as she stood near the edge of the yard, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her gaze fixed on the horizon that had revealed so much the night before. The air was still again. Not empty. Not waiting. Simply present, holding its place without urgency. Around her, the others moved through the final routines of the day. A bucket carried across the yard. A door closing with a soft, familiar sound. Low voices exchanging words that no longer carried the weight they had the night before. The fear had not disappeared, but it had been redefined, shaped into something that no longer controlled every thought. Anna tilted her head slightly, listening. Not searching for a sound, but confirming its absence. The sky above remained clear, uninterrupted, offering no sign of movement, no hint of what it might hold later. She did not need it to. She understood now that what mattered was not what appeared, but how it moved when it did. Across the yard, Lieutenant Carter stood near the same post as before, his posture unchanged, his presence as steady as the structure around him. He did not look toward the sky. He did not scan the horizon with urgency. He simply stood, observing the space in front of him, as if everything that needed to be known was already accounted for. Anna watched him for a moment, not with curiosity, but with recognition. The same restraint. The same control. Not imposed. Chosen. She stepped forward, her movement slow, deliberate, closing the distance between them by a few feet before stopping. Close enough to be seen. Not close enough to require response. Carter noticed her immediately. His gaze lifted, meeting hers without surprise, without question. For a second, the world around them seemed to quiet further, as if even the small sounds of the compound understood not to interfere. Anna held his gaze, her expression unchanged, her posture steady. Then, after a brief moment, she spoke. Not loudly. Not softly. Just enough for him to hear. You knew. Carter did not answer immediately. He did not look away, but his expression shifted slightly, not in denial, not in confirmation, but in acknowledgement of the weight behind the words. He exhaled once, slowly, then replied in the same measured tone. We plan carefully. The answer was simple. Direct. And complete. Anna did not nod. She did not respond with words. She did not need to. The statement aligned perfectly with everything she had observed, everything she had understood without being told. Plan carefully. Not avoid. Not hesitate. Choose. The distance between them remained unchanged, but something within it settled into clarity. No misunderstanding. No illusion. Just a shared recognition of what had been revealed without explanation. Anna stepped back, the movement as controlled as everything else, and turned toward the barracks. The light had lowered further now, the edges of the world softening into evening once again. The others were already moving inside, their silhouettes passing through the doorway one by one, their forms dissolving into the dim interior. She paused at the entrance for a brief moment, her hand resting lightly against the wooden frame, her gaze lifting one last time toward the open sky. It revealed nothing. And that was enough. She stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a quiet, final sound. Outside, Carter remained where he was, his posture unchanged, his attention returning to the yard, to the routine, to the structure that held everything in place. But for a brief moment, his gaze shifted upward, just once, acknowledging the same sky that had been understood in silence. Then he looked forward again. The night would come. The patterns would continue. And somewhere between sound and silence, between power and restraint, the truth would remain exactly where it had always been. Not in what was done, but in what was deliberately left undone. Anna lay down on her bunk as the last light faded completely, her eyes closing without resistance, her breathing steady, her mind no longer searching for answers. She had found what she needed in a single night. Not certainty. Not peace. Something more precise. Understanding. And that was enough.